Far beyond the core of known space, in the shadowy fringes where survival was a daily battle, the Deathworlders ruled. Hardened by their brutal home planet, a world riddled with poisonous flora, savage predators, and violent storms, the Deathworlders were a proud and ruthless species. They valued strength above all else and responded to threats with swift and overwhelming force. Peace was a fleeting concept, a luxury that often led to weakness and ruin. So when a faint cryptic SOS signal echoed through their deep space communication arrays, it triggered an immediate and powerful reaction. The signal was unlike any the Deathworlders had ever intercepted. Complex, layered, and urgent, it carried the unmistakable hallmark of an advanced civilization in dire peril. The message was fragmented, but the plea for help was clear. Despite the limitations, the transmission bore hallmarks of desperation, repeated distress calls embedded in encrypted bursts, suggesting the sender's technology was on the brink of collapse. The signal emanated from a remote star system, far outside Deathworlder-controlled space, in a region known for hostility and territorial disputes among several alien factions. At the Deathworlder High Council, a rare gathering convened to address the mysterious message. The council chamber was austere, decorated with relics of past wars, trophies symbolizing countless conquests and losses. The fleet commander, Grathok Varn, a veteran of 100 battles, argued vehemently for an immediate military response. To him, the SOS was a potential threat that could not be ignored. It might even be a trap set by rival species, but the Deathworlders had to show strength. Ignoring it could be tantamount to inviting war to their doorstep. "We must send our fleet at once," Grathok declared, his voice echoing with grim certainty. "We cannot afford hesitation." In contrast, the chief scientist, a cautious and analytical mind named Kayla, urged prudence. She warned that the signal might be a lure, a cunning trap intended to draw the Deathworlders into a conflict designed to bleed them dry. "We must investigate further," she argued. "The signal's complexity suggests advanced technology. We cannot simply rush in blind. We need more data to avoid walking into a kill zone." Meanwhile, a young diplomat named Zira Anvik, new to the council but respected for her forward-thinking ideals, advocated for a balanced approach. "This could be an opportunity for peace," she suggested. "We should not assume hostility. If the SOS is genuine, they may seek allies against a common enemy. Sending a fleet immediately does not preclude attempts at communication or negotiation." The council deliberated in tense silence, weighing centuries of fear, pride, and survival instincts. Ultimately, the fear of appearing weak won. The decision was unanimous. The Deathworlders would dispatch their fleet immediately, not to negotiate, but to assert control over the situation. As preparations began, Grathok Varn was appointed to lead the fleet. His task was clear: reach the SOS coordinates, evaluate the threat, and respond with decisive military might if necessary. The young diplomat Zira was assigned to accompany him, tasked with exploring any potential diplomatic openings, though her influence was limited in the hardened military environment. As the fleet launched into the void, the tension among its crew was palpable. The message was clear. An alien SOS had triggered a reaction that would ignite conflict. No one knew if the fleet was heading toward salvation or annihilation, but one truth was undeniable. The Deathworlders were ready to wage war, and their fleet was on a collision course with fate. The Deathworlder fleet sliced through the vast emptiness of space, engines roaring with relentless power, driven by the grim determination of its commander, Grathok Varn. Days had passed since the council's decision, and the crew was tense, knowing the stakes were high. The mysterious SOS signal had led them far from their home systems to an unfamiliar and perilous sector, one riddled with dangerous cosmic phenomena and hostile factions. Every sensor scan was met with anxious anticipation. Was this a trap, or a genuine plea for help? As the fleet approached the coordinates, an eerie silence settled over the command bridge. The space surrounding the target system was shrouded in swirling nebulae and ion storms, disrupting long-range sensors and making navigation treacherous. The sector was known to be contested territory, A chessboard of power plays between various alien factions, none willing to cede ground easily. The fleet's first glimpse of the SOS planet was a bleak sight, a desolate, battered world scarred by ancient wars and still smoldering battlefields. Vast crater fields and ruined cities stretched across its surface, testifying to conflicts long past yet freshly reopened. Orbiting the planet was a fleet of smaller, sleek ships bearing the unmistakable markings of the alien civilization that had sent the distress call, an advanced but fragile species called the Solari. The Solari, diminutive yet highly intelligent, had long been regarded as peaceful traders and scholars by other galactic civilizations. Their technology was sophisticated, with sleek ships capable of swift maneuvers but lightly armed compared to the Deathworlders' brutal war machines. When the Deathworlder fleet established communication, initial contact was tense. The Solari greeted them cautiously but clearly relieved to see reinforcements arrive. Grathok Varn, rigid and commanding, met with the Solari leaders aboard their command vessel. The Solari explained they were under siege by a ruthless enemy known only as the Jarkar, a brutal warrior species bent on conquest and annihilation. The SOS was a last desperate plea for help, broadcast before their defenses would be overwhelmed. But mistrust lingered heavily in the air. The Deathworlders' reputation as relentless conquerors preceded them, and some Solari whispered doubts about whether these warriors from a Deathworld could be trusted. Likewise, Grathok's war-hardened instincts saw the Solari as weak and vulnerable, potentially liabilities in the face of true conflict. Meanwhile, Zira Anvik, the young diplomat embedded within the fleet, worked tirelessly to bridge the gap. She met privately with Solari envoys, urging cooperation and highlighting the strategic advantage of a united front. Her presence brought a glimmer of hope for peaceful collaboration, but Grathok's rigid military command often undermined her efforts. The Deathworlder culture simply did not value diplomacy in the same way. As the fleet established defensive perimeters, sensors detected unusual activity on the planet's surface, stealthy movements, sabotage attempts, and signs of an imminent Jarkar assault. The Solari technology provided some early warning, but the battle lines were already drawing closer. The uneasy alliance was tested when a minor skirmish erupted in orbit. A small Jarkar scouting force attacked a Deathworlder reconnaissance ship. Grathok responded swiftly, ordering an overwhelming counterstrike that obliterated the enemy vessel, but left little room for mercy or negotiation. Within the fleet, tension grew between the hardened warriors eager for battle and the cautious diplomats hoping to avoid full-scale war. Both knew that the fragile peace could shatter at any moment, plunging the entire system into chaos. By the end of Part 2, the Deathworlders stood at the threshold of conflict, caught between their reputation for brutality and the slim chance for alliance. The SOS had led them here, but whether it would save lives or ignite war was a question no one could yet answer. Tension hung thick over the war-torn planet and the fragile alliance between the Deathworlders and the Solari. The initial relief at finding survivors was quickly overshadowed by grim realities. As the Deathworlder fleet solidified its presence in orbit and the Solari tried to regroup on the surface, disturbing new information began to emerge, details that suggested the SOS was far more complicated than a simple call for help. Grathok Varn, the battle-hardened fleet commander, was the first to notice the inconsistencies. Intelligence reports from scout ships detected irregular activity just beyond the immediate battle zone, signs of a larger force mobilizing. But curiously, these forces were not identified as the known Jarkar enemy. Instead, these shadowy fleets appeared to be manipulating the conflict from afar, pushing the Deathworlders and Solari toward a confrontation that neither side had fully anticipated. Meanwhile, Kayla Triss, the cautious scientist who had initially warned about rushing into the mission, began to uncover startling evidence. The SOS transmission itself was layered with hidden code. This code was not a mere distress signal, but a sophisticated digital trap designed to lure the Deathworlders into a predetermined conflict zone. It was a provocation, a calculated move by an unknown faction to ignite war between the Deathworlders and the Solari, or at least to pit the Deathworlders against someone. As Kayla presented her findings to the council aboard the flagship, a rift grew between the military leadership and the scientific advisors. Grathok refused to believe they had been baited. "We came here to protect our interests, not to be manipulated," he declared fiercely. His instincts screamed for immediate retaliation if the enemy dared show their face. Zira Anvik, the young diplomat, found herself caught in the middle. She pushed for a more measured approach, advocating to open channels of communication not only with the Solari, but also probing for possible intermediaries among the unknown forces pulling strings in the shadows. "If we respond with blind aggression," she warned, "we will play into their hands and lose any chance of peace." The Solari themselves were shaken. Their leaders confessed they had little knowledge of the shadowy faction orchestrating the trap, something beyond the Jarkar. The Solari's desperation to survive had forced them to send the SOS, but now they feared that deeper, more insidious forces were at work, threatening to plunge the entire sector into chaos. As days passed, subtle acts of sabotage plagued the Deathworlder fleet. Communications were intermittently jammed, supplies tampered with, and vital equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. Paranoia spread quickly. Suspicion fell on spies or traitors within the ranks. Could the enemy have infiltrated them already? The situation escalated when a covert Deathworlder reconnaissance team discovered encrypted transmissions emanating from within their own fleet. Proof that someone aboard was feeding intelligence to the Shadow faction. This revelation struck a harsh blow to morale and trust. Grathok's once steely command wavered under the pressure, forced to confront betrayal on two fronts, from without and within. In the midst of this chaos, Zira made a bold move. She arranged a secret meeting with a faction of Solari dissidents, who claimed to have contacts with the unknown manipulators. Their warnings were chilling. An ancient galactic power long believed dormant was awakening, seeking to expand its influence through proxy wars and manipulation. By the end of Part 3, the Deathworlders and their fragile allies were caught in a deadly game of deception. The SOS had indeed meant danger, but not only from the Jarkar. A hidden threat loomed, one that aimed to exploit their desperation, incite war, and shape the fate of the galaxy itself. The uneasy calm that had briefly settled over the Deathworlder fleet and their Solari allies shattered like fragile glass. The hidden threat unveiled in the previous days revealed its first brutal expression. Escalation in the form of outright warfare and betrayal from within. Tensions that had simmered beneath the surface exploded when a coordinated sabotage crippled critical systems aboard the flagship. Vital communications were severed just as the enemy forces massed nearby, leaving the fleet blind and vulnerable. The damage wasn't accidental, it was deliberate and expertly executed. Panic spread through the ranks as suspicion quickly turned inward. Someone within the Deathworlder command was leaking intelligence and possibly aiding the enemy. Grathok Varn, already burdened by the weight of command and the suspicion hanging over him, responded with ruthless efficiency. Security measures tightened, and potential suspects were interrogated with harsh resolve. Yet the traitor's identity remained elusive, sowing paranoia like a poison in the minds of every officer and soldier. Trust became a scarce commodity, fracturing the unity so vital to their survival. Amidst the chaos, Zira Anvik doubled down on her efforts to maintain a diplomatic approach. She pleaded with Grathok to consider the larger picture, that this internal sabotage and the external threat might be connected to a shadowy galactic power manipulating events from the dark. Her voice was both urgent and restrained, trying to temper the commander's growing hunger for violent retribution. Simultaneously, the Solari revealed their own desperate secret. They possessed an experimental weapon, a piece of lost technology rumored to have the power to turn the tide of battle, an ancient artifact from a forgotten era of galactic wars. However, the weapon was volatile, and its use could unleash catastrophic consequences. The Solari's leaders debated whether to deploy it, knowing that once activated, the weapon's effects might be uncontrollable. Grathok, ever the warrior, saw the weapon as a necessary risk, The Deathworlders' survival depended on decisive action. Zira, though fearful of the consequences, supported the Alliance's need to act, but insisted on thorough caution and coordination to avoid disaster. While the debate raged, the Deathworlder fleet was ambushed by a massive enemy force, an armada led by the mysterious Shadow faction pulling the strings behind the scenes. The battle was fierce and brutal. Deathworlder warships, hardened by countless campaigns, faced off against technologically advanced but merciless foes. Explosions rocked the void, and countless lives were lost in moments of chaotic fury. Within the fleet, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The traitors' sabotage had critically weakened their defenses at a pivotal moment, threatening to turn the tide against them. Amid the fury of battle, Greythawk's leadership was tested like never before. He ordered daring maneuvers and counterattacks, his mind sharp but haunted by the betrayal eating away at the fleet's cohesion. As the battle raged, Zira managed to reach out to the Silari dissidents she had contacted earlier, seeking information that might help identify the traitor and the enemy's true motives. Her risky communications uncovered evidence linking the saboteur to an infiltrator working for the Shadow faction, confirming fears of deep-rooted espionage. In the aftermath of the battle, the fleet limped back to regroup. Losses were heavy, and morale was shattered. Yet through the devastation, the Deathworlders and Solari held fast to their fragile alliance. The experimental weapon remained an option, one fraught with risk, but perhaps their only hope against overwhelming odds. Part 4 ends with the Deathworlders realizing that the war they had been drawn into was far more complex than a simple battle for survival. It was a web of betrayal and manipulation where trust was the rarest and most precious resource, and the Shadow faction's influence loomed larger than ever. The battered Deathworlder fleet hovered on the edge of exhaustion and desperation. After the devastating ambush and the internal betrayal that nearly shattered their unity, the fragile alliance with the Solari was their only hope to turn the tide of a war that had rapidly escalated beyond anyone's control. At the heart of this hope lay the Solari secret weapon, an ancient, powerful device both feared and revered for its devastating potential. The Solari leaders had debated long and hard about deploying the weapon. Known as the Starforge Catalyst, this relic of a forgotten era promised unmatched power, but came with grave risks. Its activation could disrupt entire star systems, rendering battlefields unrecognizable and threatening collateral damage on a scale no one fully understood. The decision was made. The weapon would be used, but only as a last resort and with extreme caution. Grathok Varn, despite his warrior instincts that favored overwhelming force, recognized the need to coordinate closely with Zira Anvik and the Silari scientists. Zyra's diplomatic skills were crucial in maintaining trust and ensuring that the weapon's deployment would not spiral into chaos or provoke wider galactic consequences. She mediated between the fierce pragmatism of Grathok and the cautious deliberation of the Solari. Meanwhile, reconnaissance missions had confirmed the enemy's position. A sprawling armada led by the Shadow faction revealed to be the Velrath Dominion, an ancient empire thought extinct but reawakened through manipulation and advanced technology. Their goal was not just conquest, but total domination, using proxy wars like this to weaken rival species before the Velrath's direct intervention. As the Deathworlder and Solari fleets prepared for the decisive engagement, tension soared. The crew aboard the flagship felt the weight of the galaxy's fate pressing down. Zira's diplomatic efforts intensified, seeking to solidify alliances with smaller factions sympathetic to the Deathworlder cause. Meanwhile, Grathok drilled, his warriors relentlessly, preparing them for the brutal conflict ahead. The battle commenced with shocking ferocity. The Velrath Dominion's fleet unleashed waves of advanced weaponry, forcing the Deathworlders and Solari into a desperate defensive stance. Ships exploded in brilliant bursts, debris scattering across the void. Yet the Deathworlders fought with savage tenacity, their unyielding spirit pushing back against overwhelming odds. At the turning point, the Solari activated the Starforge Catalyst. A massive surge of energy pulsed from the weapon, creating a dazzling light show across the battlefield. The weapon disrupted enemy shields and weapon systems, crippling key portions of the Velrath fleet. However, its use also destabilized nearby celestial phenomena, causing unpredictable gravitational anomalies that threatened both fleets. Chaos erupted as ships struggled to maintain control. Some Deathworlder vessels were caught in violent gravitational storms. Solari crews scrambled to stabilize the weapon's core to prevent catastrophic meltdown. Greythawk's command was tested to its limits, orchestrating tactical retreats and counterattacks amidst the turmoil. Amidst the maelstrom, Zyra negotiated a temporary ceasefire with the Velrath commanders. Her bold diplomacy leveraged the chaos caused by the weapon to demand parley, seeking to uncover whether any factions within the Velrath ranks were willing to defect or negotiate peace. The ceasefire was tenuous but opened a narrow window for dialogue. Part 5 ends on a cliffhanger. The Starforge catalyst had turned the tide, but at a grave cost. The battlefield was transformed into a volatile zone, and the true nature of the Velrath Dominion's ambitions remained shrouded in mystery. The alliance between Deathworlders and Solari was tested by the weapon's aftermath, and the fate of the galaxy hung in a precarious balance. The battlefield had transformed into a volatile and unpredictable zone after the devastating activation of the Starforge catalyst. Debris floated in the wreckage-strewn void. Gravitational anomalies rippled through space, and the tension between allies and enemies alike reached a breaking point. The fragile ceasefire brokered by Zira Anvik hung by a thread, but the war was far from over. The Deathworlder fleet, though battered and weary, regrouped with renewed determination. Greythawk Varn, tempered by the harsh lessons of betrayal and sacrifice, assumed a more measured command style, balancing his warrior instincts with the cautious diplomacy Zira advocated. Together, they prepared for what would be the final and most decisive confrontation with the Velrath Dominion. In the days leading up to battle, intelligence revealed critical vulnerabilities within the Velrath command structure. Zyra's secret negotiations had borne fruit. Disaffected factions within the Dominion, tired of endless conquest and manipulation by their shadow leaders, were willing to aid the alliance in exchange for autonomy and peace. This inside information was vital, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the despair. The Deathworlders and Solari coordinated a multi-pronged assault. The plan hinged on exploiting the Velrath's fractured leadership and using precise strikes to disable their command ships, which held the Dominion's fleet cohesion. Greythawk led the main assault force, while Zyra oversaw diplomatic channels to keep the newly allied factions committed to the fragile coalition. The final battle was epic in scale and intensity. Swirling around the shattered planet and its orbit, fleets clashed with unparalleled ferocity. Deathworlder warships unleashed relentless barrages. Solari ships used their advanced technology to outmaneuver foes, and the defectors from the Velrath ranks sabotaged enemy vessels from within. The tide slowly turned as the Alliance exploited the cracks in the Dominion's defenses. Yet victory came at a heavy price. Many brave warriors on all sides fell, and entire star systems were destabilized by the aftereffects of the Starforge catalyst. Greythawk faced personal loss. Several of his most trusted officers died in heroic last stands. The fleet's cohesion, strained by months of conflict and internal distrust, was only held together by sheer will and Zira's persistent efforts at unity. The climax unfolded when Greythawk's flagship engaged the Velrath Dominion's command vessel in a desperate, close-quarters duel. The battle was brutal and personal, two commanders embodying the war's stakes locked in combat that would decide the fate of countless lives. Through cunning strategy and raw resolve, Greythawk emerged victorious, shattering the Dominion's command and forcing a retreat. With the Dominion's forces in disarray, the Alliance seized the opportunity to enforce a lasting peace. Zyra led the diplomatic mission to formalize treaties, demanding reparations and guarantees to prevent future manipulations by shadow powers. The surviving factions agreed, wary but hopeful for a new era. The aftermath was sobering. The war had exposed the dangers of distrust, manipulation, and unchecked ambition. The Deathworlders, once feared as merciless conquerors, had demonstrated a capacity for alliance and restraint, evolving beyond their brutal reputation. The Solari, though deeply scarred, had survived through courage and cooperation. As the fleets began to rebuild and return home, Grathok and Zira stood united, reflecting on the cost of war and the fragile peace they had forged. The galaxy remained uncertain and dangerous, but a new chapter had begun, one where survival depended not on domination but on understanding, trust, and the willingness to face hidden threats together.